Hi, my name is Vic Highland, and Mike and I run Blues Camp UK. We've done a number of CDs that help you pass the grades for the RGT electric guitar exams. And today I wanted to just quickly run through the sort of mid-range of the grades, 3, 4 and 5. I just want to give you a few pointers because obviously these CDs are free with the actual RGT books if you get them from us. But we wanted to maybe introduce a few sort of psychological ideas for your practice, and give you a little bit of an insight to what some of the examiners are looking for in the playing. So basically, where these grades differ from the earlier grades, whereas most of the chords for the previous grade were open chords at the bottom of the guitar, grade 3 goes into the territory of the bar chord. Now, of course, this is a little bit of a quantum leap in guitar playing terms, because bar chords are quite tricky at first, but once you've mastered them, then it really opens the guitar up, and it gives us an advantage over the piano, which the piano player can't sort of really compete with, in that once you've learned a shape, just by moving it, you just change key. And then obviously you have other little shortcuts where once you've learned little variations within a chord, then they transpose as well. And then of course the same thing happens with the scales. So a scale that you learnt from say grade 1, which was fretted, like this pentatonic minor scale, once you know that that's your A root note, you can just play that anyway. As long as you know what that opening root note is, then you've got that one in another key, which means that we can very quickly learn to play in quite awkward keys using the same information. Right, so with grade 3 then, the scales, as I say, they're all transpositional. In the book they're shown in A. Now, one of the problems that happens in the grades is that the scales, because they're written in A, there's a tendency for some of the candidates to practice them always in the key of A. And as I've mentioned before, it's a very, very good idea to get into this thing of moving, once you've learnt the pattern, move it. Because often when you learn, you might think that you know a scale because you've got these notes down. But you may have actually unwittingly learnt exactly where they are on the fretboard, where in actual fact what you need to do is you need to learn them as a muscle memory pattern. Because once you've got them as a muscle memory, you can transpose because it's the same thing. But notes on a fretboard don't transpose. So then there's a tendency for people to do things like overshoot strings where they go up, overshoot the frets as they go up the fretboard, because they, you know, it's the same distance. So it is definitely like, which fingers am I using, and you know, getting used to the fact that if you play with this system, making sure you use your little finger for the scales, you can really feel out a scale. Okay, so that's one of the things to be careful of in the scale section. Now, with the chords, we'll talk about these for grades 3 and 4, and then we'll go back, because grade 5 is slightly different with the scales and the chords. So, for the chords for grades 3 and 4, it's the first time obviously we're seeing bar chords. Now, there is a problem with bar chords in that once you take that and you bar it, there's a tendency for some of those notes to be dead. Yeah. Because the secret of playing a bar chord is obviously you've got to get enough pressure in the bar, which will mean having your thumb supporting that first finger. And if you ever notice that this happens, your thumb is in the wrong place. Quite a common mistake where you get this finger bent. The other classic thing is if you're moving a bar chord, this tends to happen to start with. And the easy thing to get into, to correct that, is when you go to move, and you're moving to a chord at the same more or less the same shape, is to, as Mike did there, just release the pressure.
Release the top.
Yeah, release the pressure, slide it out and then put the pressure back. There's a tendency for people earlier on to do this sort of thing when they're moving. They put too much
If you
pressure.
put your fingers in line with your thumb as you do it, it's that pinching movement.
That's right.
Keep it
So
straight.
we've got that little idea there. Now, in the section where they ask you about the chords, you're going to be in grades. In fact, in grades 3, 4 and 5, you're going to be playing them in two positions. One is an E shape, one is an A shape. Now, the classic mistakes that happen in an exam, things like this. Somebody's asked to play the chord of F sharp minor, let's say. They'll play this one, no problem. Then this one will end up here, or it'll end up here, because they know the E shape but they don't know the A shape, or they'll know the shapes at the bottom of the guitar but they won't know them further up. They're classic mistakes. So there's a little way around this. If you learn your chords when you play the two patterns, do the E shape first of all. So if it was F sharp minor, play your E shape here, and then you either go up 7 or down 5, meaning down in sound. So up in sound, you're coming up this way. So if you're at the 2nd fret and you add 7, you go to the 9th fret. And then you obviously have to change to the A shape. And in the heat of the moment in an exam, that will save you marks. Trust me on that one. It's definitely something that happens. So now if we went to the chord of C, we can go down 5 or up 7. The other thing to remember is don't count them. Don't do this sort of thing, because that looks really naff. But if you think, well, I'm at the 8th fret, take 5 away, 3, change to the A. There it is. Okay? And that works really well for the chords in grade 4 and grade 5 as well. Just a word about the chords in grade 5. There are some of the chords, the 6th chords, have some of the notes killed off in the chord because you haven't got enough fingers. Now, the 6th chord has got like a dead note, which is fine. And in jazz, we do that all the time. Jazz voices are full of chords where missing out. And that at first seems a bit weird, but that's the future, my friends. As you go up learning interesting chords, there will be some very strange things that you have to do. But anyway, that's the only area there. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the one element of the grade 5 scales that I missed actually originally. So with the grade 5 scales, one of the things that really sets that apart from the other two grades is there's one part of them where you've got them in more than one position. And it's only one octave. So up to here, we've got like a 2-octave scale. But in grade 5, we've got these scales where you've got a 1-octave pattern, and it moves up the guitar and replicates. Now when you see it on the piece of paper, it looks like there's a whole seething mass of scales that you've never seen before. When in actual fact, you have, but not quite like that. Because what they actually are is the lower octave of this scale, played an octave higher, and then put alongside that one. So if you think of that, and you moved it up 12 frets, that's now in the same octaves. And that's not listed in the book, but that's one of them. And then, what's great about the guitar is we can transpose that. Move that across the string, down 5 frets, same shape. Okay, across the string, down 5 frets. The only problem is, because the guitar tuning changes, we have to compensate, because if you tune the guitar manually, you'll know at this point we have to go to the 4th fret, so we have to compensate for that different. Okay, and then suddenly these are magically the same ones that are in the book, and that's explained on the CD. So that's something just to keep in mind. Right. So rhythm guitar. Now again, if anybody's seen the previous lower grades clip that we did for YouTube, it explains that how to develop the rhythm, but keeping it fairly straightforward to start with. Now at this level, you want to do something a little bit more interesting with the rhythm patterns. You don't really want to sit just with one pattern. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. You could either learn some different patterns so that you've got a 4/4 rhythm structure. So if we just did, if I just played like, that's using the same pattern. That's just using the same pattern. But if I was to go, even if I play just one strum in that bar, it sounds interesting. So sometimes you can give variations by simplifying ideas down. But a little bit of variation sounds really good. But as you go on up these grades, grade 4, grade 5 particularly, you should be able to get some really good rhythm patterns going on with your right hand. So, and it's that thing which I've mentioned before about having some sort of drum beat that you work to, getting used to that, so that if you can hear those type of things going on in your head before you set off to play. There's a lot of people, they don't even count themselves into rhythm patterns in the exam. They're so sort of hyped up, ready to go. They sort of launch in, and then they'll find that they get a little bit lost. So it's a good idea to sort of start. So you start to really use some of the ideas that you've programmed yourself.
Have a pattern in your head before you start.
Yeah. I mean, in actual fact, there's some classic stories of really great musicians being asked about, what's the secret of being able to be consistently a good player. I mean, one of them that really sticks out in my mind is something that happened with the great jazz trumpet player Louis Armstrong. And this guy used to go and play with different musicians all around the country in America. And sometimes he'd never seen these people before. He'd get on an airplane, he'd chauffeur to the gig, and that's the first time he saw these musicians. And somebody said to him, "How is it that you always sound good?" And he said, "Well, I've got a band in my head, and I listen to these unless the guys out there are better." So it's this idea of having this internalised sound and working to that, which I think is the secret for a lot of that sort of stuff, really. Right, so with the rhythm playing, what you need to watch out for also is, instead of just repeats, you've also got far more dynamics, which you must make sure that you get, because they're worth a lot of marks. You must at least attempt them, because the way that the marking structure works, which is worth knowing actually, isn't it, if you're doing an exam, to know what the examiner's looking for. They're built into like little criteria boxes. So the examiner's looking at this. It's not a case like, oh, I made a mistake so I knock a mark off. It's not like that. Okay. It tends to be, did the candidate do this? Did the candidate do that? And then depending on what the candidate actually did, will fit you into little brackets, the merit bracket or the distinction bracket and so on. And that does actually lead to some anomalies, and I think one of them is actually the tendency that if you miss out the dynamics in the rhythm patterns, in the examiner's criteria, that thing about observing the dynamics is only in the distinction box. So if you don't put that in at all, you can't be in the distinction box. So you must make sure you get them in, even if it's just, you don't get them all, but at least you attempted them. Okay, that's very important because they tend to be left out. The other point is that when you're doing the rhythm patterns, and you've got 30 seconds or so to study the pattern before you start, by the time you're doing grades 3, 4 and 5, you should not be sitting there trying to work out what the chords are in that 30 seconds. You should be looking at the structure. There may be the odd string of chords you go, oh my goodness, that looks really tough, and you've got to get them down. But generally, if it says C, you shouldn't be going, G, you're wasting your time. So that little bit of time at the beginning, you've got to train yourself to get them down. And one of the things I I get people to do is just play lots and lots of rhythmic guitar patterns, you know, chord sequences, and just get good at being open up some sort of fake book, you know, a chord book of some description, you know, songs of the 60s or something, and just bash your way through them. And then go back and learn where you went wrong, you know, fix it. But the first thing is straight through, because it gets that immediacy in your playing.
And is it fair to say when you actually look at these chords, you can see the patterns in the chords and to know if you're going to play in the E position or the A position?
Good. That's a very good point, actually. Thank you for reminding me there. Because this is another thing. The last thing you want to do is to make decisions about which one you're going to do. Right. So, because you're playing at sight, it's a good idea to say, right, when you get into the rhythm guitar part, get it so that you're working around 3, 5 and 7. So the E shape would cover the G chord, the A and the B, and then the A shape would cover the C, the D and the E, and with the F down maybe at the first fret.
Sure.
And then obviously all the sharps and flats sitting in there. Now once you've done that, you don't get that sort of moment of, I'm up here, oh my goodness, where am I going to go? You know, and all that sort of stuff that goes on. So you get really good at being able to play that sort of thing.
Because that's often a panic situation.
It is, and it's also, when you see some people playing, it's all this going on all the time, because they only know an E chord. And that's really obvious to a guitar examiner. Mind you, saying that, you know, there are great guitar players who played like that. And
it depends on the dynamics you want.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and it also depends on just you know, sometimes people have written songs because that's how it was, they fell under their fingers and they carried on playing it that way. Right, now the lead section. So with the lead, if we just play something in, well, we could just play something in A minor, it's not really too much of a problem. It's, again, a little bit like we did before.
Okay.
If we just play a pattern through, I'll do a solo that's sort of a grade 3 type of solo, and then move up to a grade 4, and then we'll talk a little bit about the grade 5 ones because there's a little bit more detailed. Okay, so just an A minor pattern here. So there's a few bits in there. String bending was a little bit more interesting. I also used a natural minor scale in some of those phrases. And also some of those ideas were sort of, I don't know, satire a bit. Yeah, Jimmy Page-ish or something, I don't know. But there's a tendency for, you know, obviously the importance of the phrasing is really, really, you know, because they're expecting more musicality in your playing as you get underway. So that's fine. Now grade 4, because you've got 2 scales in grade 4, you are 2 scale shapes for each type of, 2 positions for each scale. There's a feeling that you should be moving a little bit more. Now, I know a lot of people teach it from the point that you should be playing from this pattern and then playing from that pattern, but I don't really feel that makes people play very musically. So what I would suggest is when you're playing, learn some solos, learn some good solos by people, and move a little bit so that you're sort of doing that. So let's just play, and I'm going to.
We'll drop an E minor in it this time as well.
Yeah, just minor. As long as we're just in there, it doesn't really matter. So I'll move to another pattern. Sort of moving around, and again you could play a little bit more interesting string bending, so if you play a little bit again, go on. Okay. So now that was obviously a lot more complex, so pitching notes and controlling the bend, And bending a note and then putting vibrato at the top is really quite tough. So if you could do that and pitch the note, then that would be great, because an examiner will think, well, that's really good control.
Yeah.
Now, with grade 5, we've got the 5 position scales. Now, there are some examples of this where people are doing solos and they just move from, they do each pattern. Right. Now, there is something to say that when you play something in a particular place, certain phrases happen there, and they don't happen in other places. So, you know, certain guitar licks will work there, but when you transpose them to another pattern, they don't. And there is something to be said for the different sort of tone in different places. But to be honest, that isn't what drives most guitarists about them playing. They have certain patterns that work really well for them. So, and even so, you know, people start referring to them as the B.B. King shape, you know, all that being able to play there and you're in A. Yeah, because most of his lines fit really well, or Peter Green's phrases work really well like that. And then there are other shapes you think, well, that works really well for that sort of, you know, Jimmy Page lick or something like that, or I've got a sweeping pattern that works really well. So it tends to be about, not so much about tone, but about what you can play there. Now my problem is, if you just go in and play a solo based on the 1 octave in 5 different positions, it's going to make your solo sound pretty dull, generally, unless you're a really good player and you can just do that anyway, right? So I think you've got to focus more on the musicality. Learn phrases by people, you know, learn a bunch of solos, whatever your favourite guitar player is, but it's got to be somebody who plays lead. So there are lots of lead guitar solos in songs, but they're not stealable. I'll give you an example. You know, solos by the Chili Peppers may not be stealable.
No.
They fit that song, but it's difficult to nick them out of there and put them somewhere else. Whereas
Santana.
if you looked at Santana, Hendrix, Clapton, Page, you know, or go back to the early blues players, some rock and roll players, you know, or rock bands that play solos, but not, you know, try to avoid the mega speed players, because a lot of that technically is amazing and you probably won't be able to nail it. And not only that, you may not be able to workably transpose it either. It has got to be something that when you learn a solo, you know what key you're in and you know how it fits the scales. So a grade 5 solo, the type of thing. So if you just play the same chords, play the same chords again, and I've got some arpeggios in there. And again, you may have a few techniques that, you know, will be considered as being beyond grade 5 that you may be able to do, like octaves, for instance, because if you're into jazz guitar, you know, there's a lot of that sort of stuff. You can pick some octave patterns out. An examiner, that would make an examiner think, oh, that's good, because I'm not expecting that yet, you know. And then obviously really great guitar lines, because again, examiners will be able to spot things that's good phraseology. So if you've got, you know, a classic sort of Hendrix lick or a Albert King type phrase or a Clapton phrase that you can put in, they'll know, oh, that's good. That means this guy knows some solos by somebody else, you know. So that's good. Now, the other sections, the knowledge of the instrument, the spoken tests, the aural tests, again, very, very similar. This is covered again on the CDs in much more detail. Again, you should really know all the notes of the guitar, and you need to know some of the theory. And the theory, really, is practical theory, knowing notes of various scales. And of course, one of the ways to do that is, okay, you can study the theory books if you want. which the RGT do, but I would say when you're playing the scales through, just say the notes. Get an understanding of what the notes are in classic keys, you know, A, and G and C and all that sort of thing, and then also with the pentatonics. And it's also a good idea to know which notes are missing out of the main scales to make a pentatonic. Okay. And then one other sort of classic question, I think it's a grade 5, when they ask you notes of chords in the key. Well, the thing is, because whenever you play pop music, it tends to be chords, especially pop music, it tends to be chords that fit a key. Occasionally you get some songs that, and particularly songs with fifth chords in, which can wander outside of the keys. But generally, you know, if you're playing something in C, you expect an F and a G and an A minor and a D and an E minor, because they're in the key of C, those chords. So the easy way of learning this is you go, let's say we do that in G for the sake of argument. Think of the G major scale. Here you go. First, fourth and fifth are majors. Chords 2, 3 and 6 are minors. Right? You don't even need to know about 7. Alright? Just don't worry about that at all. So that's your answer. So you would go, they sit right next to one another, and they may be, because you only need to answer, let's say 4 chords in the key. Chord 2 is a minor. So we've got G minor, G major, C major, D major, A minor. And you can transpose that now anyway, can't you? So B, F sharp, C sharp minor. Right? Very simple. So that's grade 5. And then again with the aural test, there are things that are done on the CD, but just getting good at working songs out by ear is a great way of doing things, because there's certain elements of the aural test that unless you do them a lot, you're not going to suddenly get good at because you spent 10 minutes studying it. It tends to be a process. Right, okay, so hopefully that's been useful, and hopefully we'll see you again very soon.